Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Lion's Heart. And in this video, I'm going to be speaking about how your mind actually creates the reality that you experience. And I first want to start with two questions. The first is, have you ever noticed or questioned really, how, when you look around reality and you see things like trees and a chair and cups, why do these things look the way they do? Why do they seem so consistently those specific objects, right? And why are they perceived as that one thing altogether? Take a chair, for example. It's just a collection of, shapes and objects, but it's always perceived as like a chair, like it's that thing, right? And it kind of comes together as that. And the next question is, have you ever felt like reality just as its own thing, not anything specific in reality, but reality as its own thing kind of feels like this dream-like substance, like it's just kind of made out of this like kind of Play-Doh or, made up stuff, or almost like dream-like substance to reality, right? And just keep those questions kind of in the back of your mind and maybe contemplate them as we go here. But they're very key to this presentation and really this video. So the claim that I want to make in this video is that your mind is actually constantly creating and carving and conceptualizing the reality that you see around you. And if we just take this in terms of, natural biology, like normal life, nothing spiritual, nothing metaphysical, like just life, the mind constantly has a bombardment of, shapes, colors, sounds, sensations, lighting, threats, possible benefits, right? There's all these things happening in reality that the mind has to organize and label and put into little boxes so that you can kind of very quickly know, okay, this is good, stay away from that, go there, right? And then not only that, but also have a consistent experience of reality. You can have a experience of reality that is, solid and, consistent, and, there's nothing like random or kind of weird or crazy happening. It's like reality is very much reality. It's very much what it is, and it's very solid as that, right? And what I want to say here is that this is the mind being very efficient. This is the mind being very, evolving millions of years to do this. But really, like from moment to moment, there is nothing there. Actually, there is no tree there. There is no chair there. With our minds not doing that, there really is just a bunch of shapes and colors, and it's meaningless. It's just like this meaningless raw experience, right? It's just this meaningless, combination and formation of random shapes and colors and things. And our mind is going vroom, and our mind is literally shaping the exact reality that we experience out of this just complete raw data, right? And it's pretty incredible. And you might even notice, like in your own experience now, maybe if you look around your room, maybe there's like a cup, there's a chair, and what I want you to get is that right now in this moment, that is that dynamic happening. And you actually might say to this argument, okay, I get that, I get that there's like my mind is like organizing and interpreting and kind of putting these things into a value system. Like, okay, that's an apple and that's a twig, and an apple is more important than a twig, so let's put more like value on the apple. But what I'm saying here is a little deeper than that. It's what I'm saying is that there's actually no apple there at all. There's no twig there at all, right? There's just that shape and color and whatever. And then the mind is actually turning it into and conceptualizing it and basically morphing it into that object, making it an apple, right? Making it a twig, right? It's going like boom, and like morphing your whole reality around you into these objects and these things, right? Whereas if you didn't have any history of apples, if you didn't have the label apple, the language of apple in your mind, that might not be an apple. That might be something else, right? So what we want to get at here is just, it's beyond just like, okay, yeah, my mind evolved to like notice a rock and then a tree and then like a snake and put those in like, it's like, no, what I'm saying is like, there's no rock, there's no snake there, right? That's the thing. That's what our mind is doing. Our mind is creating those things in reality out of nothingness, out of raw experience, out of random objects and shapes. Now, this might all seem kind of trivial and obvious, but what I'm getting at is very profound here. So just please stick with me. I got some more examples to show, and I guarantee this will blow your mind if it clicks properly. So I'm going to pull up the image of a weapon here. And as you can see, just notice in your experience, like what comes to mind when you see this, right? You might think, a certain word. Because of certain algorithmic reasons, I can't say that word, but you know what that is, right? That object, right? So weapon. And then there's stories around it, right? This is a dangerous weapon that can hurt me. This is used for violence. I need to be alert around this thing. And then maybe some emotions come up like fear or shock or anxiety or something like that, right? When you see this weapon. And so notice how those are all associated with this image, with this weapon, right? And now just notice like how you see this image and then what kind of happens in your experience. And my claim here is that all of that is something that you're doing, right? There is nothing inherent in that image that is doing anything like this is a weapon, this is used for violence, I need to be alert, and then the emotions associated as well. Notice how those are all not inherent in that image, in those shapes and colors, right? And just notice all this is a collection of shapes and colors, right? Your mind is assembling it into a weapon, and no one is doing that for you. You are doing that by yourself, right? And here we can actually see a further example of that by actually breaking this object down into different shapes, meaningless shapes. And notice how these meaningless shapes were there the whole time, yet when we really break them apart and pick them apart, we see how, meaningless they all are, until they are put together in a certain formation and a certain pattern that our mind then turns into a weapon, right? And this example here really shows how our mind is doing that, right? So just stick with me here and stay with me on, and just stay with your mind too, and stay with how your mind is doing this. All there is just the more and more you look at it, the more just break it apart, just deconstruct what that image is, right? And see more and more that it's being morphed into that object. It's being morphed into that thing called the weapon, right? And now imagine that I tell you that this is actually a cake, right? It's very convincing, but this is actually a cake. And just notice how your interpretation might change, right? Now it's the same exact object, nothing has changed, but your relation to it, your feelings about it, and your interpretation of it are completely different. Maybe it's no longer a threat, but maybe now it's seen as potential food. It's seen as a potential benefit. You might be wondering, how it tastes, or you might be thinking it looks delicious, right? And wondering if there's chocolate inside versus if it's loaded, right? So it's not that the cake used to be a weapon. It never was, right? So notice how the interpretation has changed versus just some words that have come out of my mouth, just some things that I've told you. That whole object morphs and changes into something new, right? And again, this might seem trivial, but there is something very deeply profound happening here. And notice how, convinced you are that what you see and what you feel about that object is until I change the words and the language around it. But notice how throughout this whole experiment, nothing has changed at all. There's just been the same image on the screen the whole time. So it brings us to the question, how is this happening? Why is this happening? And we need to look beyond the explanation of, well, that's only happening because I thought it was a cake. I thought it was a weapon, and then you told me it was a cake, so that changed how I felt about it. We need to go deeper than that. We need to really question, how did that object change while nothing about it changed, right? How did that object and how we perceive it and how we feel about it and what we think about it change and become a completely different experience when it was the same exact object on the screen the whole time, right? And also noticing that it was just a collection of shapes and colors that we were morphing into a tool that is used for this and that means this and that is a threat or a benefit, right? And how we morphed that from a collection of shapes and objects. And what we want to get at here is that you are creating that object. You are doing that, right? You are doing the weaponness of it. You are doing the, again, weaponness of that collection of shapes and colors, right? You are morphing it into that. Another example. Check out this image of a tree, right? So what happens when you see the following image, right? Maybe it's something like, okay, this is a part of nature. This helps me breathe. This supports life. And it's good, right? Good emotion. I know what that is. That's a tree, right? But what's actually there before our mind morphs this collection of shapes and colors into this singular thing with meaning, history, and a label called a tree? What's there before then, right? It is just that collection of random shapes and colors. And now take a look at the second image, right? And so work with me here. Pretend like you're like a caveman and you've never experienced a tree, because we've done the image before and we've talked about trees, your mind is kind of looking for a tree. But just kind of work with me here and just, imagine that you don't know what a tree is and that you're just kind of like this caveman and you're just seeing this image for the first time. And, it's just this raw experience, right? It's just this collection of shapes and colors. And then come back to your current self and the person who knows that's a tree, right? So now your mind says tree. And then what happens? Boom, it becomes a tree, right? Pure magic, right? Where is that happening? How is that happening, right? And in photo 2, you can see this collection of random shapes and colors. Yet in photo 1, it morphs into the actual object called a tree. And so this is actually what's happening in life, in reality, as we construct and morph our reality. And where is that happening? Where is tree happening? Where is that object merging into a tree? It's not happening out there. It's not happening. It's happening in an imagination land. It's happening in a conceptual land that doesn't exist in objective reality. That's the kicker here. That's the key. That's what we're getting at, is that this tree exists in imagination. It does not, the tree is not a thing, right? It's just a collection of objects, shapes, and colors. And we, in our human conceptualizing minds, are morphing it and imagining it into a tree so that we can make more sense of reality and we can have a stable, solid reality to live in, right? Now let this pour out into all of reality. This is what we're constantly doing with everything. This is how we are experiencing reality, right? So reality is imaginary. There it is. This example should leeway you into that, to realize that there is no objective reality. Reality is being carved. It is not out there waiting for us to perceive it. We are creating it. We are doing it. We are imagining it. For survival reasons, for language reasons, from programming. There's so much reasons why that it looks like that. But once you get this, you realize that you are the author and artist and creator of your reality. And it doesn't exist anywhere except for in your imagination. And so let's go back and forth one more time. Random collection of shapes and colors, tree. Random collection of shapes and colors, tree. And it's not that these thing doesn't exist out there. It's not that there isn't this object and these shapes and colors. It's just that once it becomes a tree, once it becomes an object called a tree, that is this collection, right? And it morphs into that object called a tree, that is completely imaginary. And look around the room that you're in, right? Chairs, cups. Notice how none of these things exist as themselves, as that thing, as a cup. A cup is just a collection of, different patterns and shapes. And you are doing that with the whole room around you. Look around the room around you. Notice that there is no lamp, there is no chair, there is no window, right? How much of that is in your imagination? How much of that is something that you are conceptualizing and doing? And now here's the kicker, is look at the screen and take a look at me. and notice that all I am is, shapes, colors, right? There's movement. There's like two things here. There's different patterns. There's this pattern, there's this pattern, and you are going vroom, and you're turning me into a human and you're turning me into a conscious human who now you're projecting all these things onto me. Like I have an inner experience. I have thoughts. I have, I'm just like you. I have feelings, right? And it's not that none of that's true, but notice that you are creating me, right? Because you actually don't know what's going on in here. All you have is your experience. You've never seen out of anyone else's eyes or been in anyone else's body per se. So notice how all of that is being created as well. Like the whole idea of me being real, and I'm not saying that I'm not real. I'm just saying that you can't know that, so it's being projected onto me, right? Try to really get to what I'm getting at. All right, guys, we're moving on. And as we do more and more of these examples, what's happening is actually this is kind of like a meditation, right? So it might seem like I'm repeating things and we're just doing the same thing over and over. But what's happening is that as we do these examples, you're becoming more and more conscious of how you are creating and morphing your reality. So just stick with me here. We've got some more examples to go. Now, I want you to check out this image that I'm pulling up of a chair, right? So again, notice what the mind does, what the mind says. This is a chair. It's used for sitting, working, etc. But I might say, why can't this be a hat? And notice how the mind takes its beliefs about this object and then limits it to that. It just makes it's just a chair, right? For the most part, in waking reality, when you see a chair, it's just a chair. It's not a weapon. It's not a hat. It's not a, workout tool. It is just a chair. And notice how you kind of just make it just that, and how consistently it is just that thing when it could be anything, right? It could be a workout tool. It could be something you bench press. It could be a hat, kind of. But you get what I'm getting at, right? It's like you turn something into a certain distinction, and then it is just that, but it's based on shapes and colors and objects, right? It's not. There's nothing inherent in those shapes and objects that make that just a chair, and it just has that specific function. So when did that collection of shapes and colors become a chair? It never did. It's being imagined by you. You are creating that. And it might be accurate. It might be a useful technique for defining and evaluating reality and having a consistent reality. That's not what I'm getting at here. I am not knocking the notion of conceptualizing and the power of conceptualizing. But notice that the whole thing is imaginary, and the whole notion of a chair and its meaning and its purpose is imagined. It doesn't actually exist in that collection of shapes and objects. It lives in a completely different place than the objective reality or that collection of objects. It's in a completely different place. And that is your imagination. That is your conceptualizing mind. And that's the key here, right? It's to realize that that is mind and it's not out there in objective reality, and how influential and how much you are creating your reality and imagining your reality, because this is imagination, right? This reality of cups and chairs and trees and tables is imaginary. It doesn't exist out there. So how much of your reality is imaginary? We have to question, Reality is not sitting there waiting to be seen. It is actively being sculpted by you. There is no chair out there waiting to be seen as a chair. You are creating the chair, right? Awesome. You guys are doing great. I'm proud of you. If you're still in it, you're doing awesome. I hope you're having insights. And stick with me here. We got a few more to go. And next I'm going to pull up this image, right? So if you check this out, you can see that, there is, it might look like a strange image, but, the closer we look, there's like a rabbit and a duck in this image, right? And if you look to the right, you can see like the duck's beak, right? And then also that can be the ears of the rabbit. So just take a look at that and notice how, maybe you've seen this before, but notice how before I said, the beak is the duck's beak and then the ears of the rabbit. right? Notice how there's no inherent rabbit or duck in that image. And just allow your mind to go back and forth between rabbit and duck, and notice how you're doing that and you're creating that, right? And all that's there is a collection of shapes and objects and colors. And there could even be no animal there. It could just be that, right? But then the mind is morphing those shapes and patterns into, oh, there's a rabbit there, or oh, there's a duck there. And then just kind of go back and forth and see how your mind is doing that. See how you're creating that and imagining that, right? And we'll move on to another image here. Same thing. Notice how here is an old woman. And then if we look at it this way, you can see that there is a young woman, right? Notice how the image did not change at all. Yet, you're seeing an old woman. Now you're seeing a young woman. And just kind of keep playing with that. Go back and forth. Go back and forth. And just see how nothing is changing in the image, yet how you're perceiving it, how you're interpreting it is. We'll do one more example. Notice how here there is a vase. There's these two vases. There's one vase. And then notice in this image how there's two faces. And notice how just not even depending on your angle, not depending on how you're looking at it, not depending on the image, but what your mind is doing, how you're interpreting it. Notice how this image changes, right? Notice how it takes a whole new life. It takes a whole new meaning when it's two faces looking at each other versus a vase, right? None of this is inherent in these random collections of shapes and colors. It's being imagined, right? It's being projected onto that and made up. Now just notice the power of your mind and notice how it's doing that with everything, right? And consider that it's doing that with the whole reality around you. Maybe you look at those images and you say, yeah, obviously, because it's just like this painting and it goes from a rabbit to a duck. Why is it so crazy that your mind isn't doing that on a much larger scale with lamps and shoes and chairs and cups, right? Why is that so crazy? And my claim here is that is what your mind is doing, and it's on a much larger scale, but it's the same exact mechanism at work. And now that we've done these experiments and you can see what I'm pointing at, it goes to question, what else lives in this imaginary domain? Well, have you ever found proof of yourself? The one behind the eyes in there? That person? That individual? Where is the one who's separate from reality? And why is it that there's someone inside there? Where is that being created? Where in reality can you find that separate individual that's behind the eyes? Why does there have to be someone in there? What if that's also imaginary and lives in the same domain as a cup? And consider that for all of reality, there is no objective reality in the sense of meaning, value, labels, purpose, and function, only what we imagine to be there. There's actually nothing there other than what we are imagining. In a sense, the substance of reality is like Play-Doh. And from that block of Play-Doh, you sculpt and imagine what you perceive to be your reality. This creates a whole world. Yet we are unaware that we are doing this, and that everyone is doing this. And if you look at reality, you can notice the vast, wildly vast amounts of different realities and dreams that people are living in. How can this be? And I love the word dream because that's such a good way to put it. It's like you're dreaming your reality, you're imagining your reality. And some mystics might say, this is how you're God, because your mind is sculpting and forming and morphing your experience of reality, your dream of reality, and that there is actually nothing here but infinity. And even things like time and space are part of that dream and imagined. And that takes us to a very much deeper domain. And the craziest part is that none of this exists anywhere other than in the imagination. That none of these objects are actually those things until we imagine them to be. And then we imagine them to be that specific distinction, and they become that and only that. Now consider, you're not merely taking in an established, consistent reality, but you are creating it. You are the artist. What world are you creating? I invite you to take responsibility as the creator of your dream, to claim yourself as God, and to live with this self-understanding that you are pure imagination. Nobody ever went into your mind and morphed the reality you perceive. You did that. Maybe it was done through programming and unconsciously, but you still did it. No one ever turned that collection of shapes and objects into a chair for you. There's nothing here but Play-Doh. What dream are you dreaming? I hope it's a beautiful one. Thanks, guys. Much love. Talk soon. Cheers.